When Helena Foster raised her wine glass, all eyes in the room turned to her. The dinner, which had been a cold formality among businessmen and magnates, was about to take a drastic turn. Lucas felt his heart race. He knew she was brave, but he had never imagined that Helena would be capable of what she did next. In that moment, the lies, the alliances, and the secrets that had held everything together began to crumble. Oh, and no one, not even him, was ready for what would come next. The morning in Maplewood started like any other. The town pulsed with the energy of a new day, the smell of fresh coffee filling the streets as workers prepared for their long shifts. In the suburbs, Helena rushed to her shift at the local cafe where she worked. With her mind occupied by bills to pay and her mother's fragile health, she barely noticed the luxury car parked on the corner. Helena was practical. She lived her life with the toughness of someone who had known hardship from an early age. At 28, she had learned how to survive, but she also knew that it wasn't enough. She worked as a waitress during the day and sewed at night to earn extra money. Every penny went to the house or to her mother's medicine, who was growing more frail by the day. It was a life of sacrifice, but Helena knew she didn't have time to complain. The door to the cafe opened, and in walked a man who stood out in the modest surroundings. Lucas Mitchell, the billionaire heir to Mitchell Industries, was an imposing figure. At 35, his presence carried weight, even though he was trying to blend in. Dressed impeccably, his eyes scanned the room quickly, as if he were searching for something or someone. Helena noticed him immediately. It was impossible not to. A man like him wasn't a usual sight in that part of town. Their eyes met for a brief second, but she quickly looked away, busying herself with organizing tables and preparing to serve. To her, he was just another passing customer. But to Lucas, this encounter was the beginning of something unexpected. Lucas's mind was restless. The pressure from his father, Samuel Mitchell, to formalize an engagement and secure a merger with a rival corporation was suffocating him. He had no interest in marriage, much less in serious commitments. To him, life had always been about keeping up appearances and managing expectations, not about feelings, but this time he was out of options. As Lucas flipped through the menu without paying much attention, Helena approached to take his order. Her calm and formal voice caught his attention. There was something about her posture, about the way she handled the situation, that made him take a closer look at her. "Good morning, sir. Have you decided what you'd like?" she asked. Lucas looked at her, and something inside him shifted. It wasn't just Helena's quiet beauty that intrigued him, but the way she carried herself. There was dignity in that simple act of serving, a strength he didn't often see in the people he dealt with. "Just a black coffee, please," he replied with a slight smile, trying to hide the exhaustion on his face. As Helena walked away, Lucas continued to watch her, his mind beginning to form an idea. It was a ridiculous solution, but he was desperate. And she seemed suitable, simple, but with a presence he could shape to suit his needs. When Helena returned with the coffee, Lucas surprised her with an unusual question. "Have you ever thought about changing your life?" The question came out of nowhere, completely unexpected and out of context. Helena, who was used to eccentric customers, simply raised her eyebrows and responded cautiously, "I think we all have at some point, sir. But why?" Lucas took a sip of his coffee, as if considering what to say next. The idea seemed more and more logical in his mind. "What if I told you I could solve all your problems? That all you'd have to do is pretend to be my fiancée for a while," he said, setting the coffee cup down, his eyes fixed on hers, watching her reaction. Helena stared at him in disbelief. This had to be a joke. A rich man offering her money to pretend to be his fiancée. It was surreal, but the serious way he said it left her unsettled. He wasn't joking. "So look, if you're trying to make some sort of cruel joke, I don't have time for that," she replied, ready to walk away. But Lucas stopped her with an intense look. "I'm not joking. I need someone to pretend to be my fiancée at an important business event. In return, I can pay for your mother's treatment and make sure you and your family never have to worry about money again." The mention of her mother made her pause. Her mother's health was her greatest concern, and while money had never been a driving force for Helena, it was what kept her life revolving around that exhausting cycle of work. Could he really help? And why her? What kind of madness was this? Why me? Helena asked, crossing her arms and leaning slightly toward the table. What makes you think I'd agree to something like this? Lucas smiled enigmatically. Because you're perfect for the role, and because I know you need the money. His words echoed in Helena's mind. It was true that she desperately needed money, but accepting such an absurd offer could bring more problems than she could imagine. What was at stake was much more than a simple deal. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. Could she trust him? This could be a blessing or a trap. Every decision carried immense weight. What would she do? Helena stood there, frozen, trying to digest what she had just heard. Her eyes didn't leave Lucas, and at the same time, her mind kept replaying his offer. Pretend to be my fiancée. Those words echoed in her head like a mantra, clashing with her common sense. Yet there was a much more powerful force at play: desperation. You really think you can buy anything, don't you? Helena finally responded, trying to keep her tone firm. She wasn't the type to bend easily. Living on the outskirts of Maplewood had hardened her. Lucas crossed his arms, his gaze sharp but not arrogant. He seemed genuine, or at least convincing. His voice softened, maybe even a little vulnerable, as though he wasn't entirely comfortable with what he was doing. I'm not trying to buy you, Helena. I'm offering you a solution, something that could change your life. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm not asking you to believe me right now. Think it over. I'll give you time. He paused, his eyes reading every thought she had. But remember, I can help your mother, and I know that matters to you. Of course, he knew. It was obvious how much she was struggling, how her mother's condition weighed on her decisions. Helena hated how right he was, but she also couldn't deny how tempting his offer was. How long are we talking about? Helena asked, her voice trembling slightly, not realizing that she was already considering the absurdity of his proposal. Lucas gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, sensing the shift in her stance. A month. No more than that. Just enough to keep up appearances and ease some people's concerns during this critical period. After that, you'll be free and well compensated. Helena shook her head in disbelief. A month of a well-crafted lie, all for money that she desperately needed. But what then? How would she feel knowing she had sold herself for this role? Could she live with it? You're asking me to lie to a lot of people. It's not just a simple favor, it's your family, your business. She sighed, rubbing her temples as if trying to alleviate the growing pressure in her mind. And what if I'm not convincing enough? Lucas leaned slightly forward, his expression serious. You will be, because you don't have to pretend to be someone else. You just need to be yourself. They expect a strong, confident woman who makes me look committed, and everything I've seen in you so far tells me you can do that. Lucas's confidence surprised Helena. She hadn't expected him to see her that way. In fact, no one had ever seen her like that. Life had been a series of invisible struggles, and now here was this man, someone who barely knew her, betting so much on her. She remained silent for a moment, battling her own doubts. Logic told her it was an insane idea, but her heart, or rather, her desperation for a way out, was stronger. And if I agree, what happens next? The question escaped her lips before she could pull back. In that instant, she knew she was giving in. Lucas relaxed in his chair, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. If you agree, everything starts immediately. We'll work on the details, the story of our relationship. I'll need you to meet a few people before the main event, so everything appears authentic. You'll have access to anything you need, he said firmly, but added something that made Helena hesitate. But I want to be clear. It's not just about looking convincing, Helena. My family can't suspect anything, especially my father and my sister. The name Samuel Mitchell wasn't unfamiliar to anyone in Maplewood. Everyone knew who the patriarch of Mitchell Industries was, ruthless, calculating, and one of the most powerful figures in the country. Pretending in front of him was something Helena knew wouldn't be easy. Your father, Helena started, but Lucas interrupted her with a serious look. Yes, him. Samuel Mitchell is naturally suspicious, and my sister Erin won't make things easy. She's sharp and will try to uncover any flaw, but I trust you. We can make this work." It was a lot to consider. Lucas wasn't just asking her to fake a relationship. He was placing his future in her hands. If she failed, it wouldn't just be him who lost. Everything could collapse for both of them. Helena knew that by accepting, she would be stepping into a dangerous game. A game of appearances, where every move would be watched, every word calculated. The risk was immense. But what did she have to lose? Her life was already trapped in a never-ending cycle of hardship. Maybe, for once, she could take control of her own narrative. She took a deep breath, looking at Lucas with determination. "Okay, I accept." The words came out before she could hesitate, and with them came the weight of the decision. Lucas nodded, his gaze steady but with a hint of relief. "Great." He stood up from the table, pulling a business card from his pocket and handing it to Helena. "Here's my contact. Tomorrow I'll send someone to pick you up. We'll begin the preparations." Helena took the card, the thick, smooth paper feeling like much more than just a card. It was the key to something new, something terrifying, but perhaps also liberating. Lucas watched her for a moment before leaving the cafe, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of the decision she had just made. As Helena watched Lucas's figure disappear through the door, she realized her life would never be the same again. She had made a deal with the devil, but if the price was her mother's salvation, maybe it was worth it. The next day, Lucas's promise became a reality when a sleek black car pulled up in front of Helena's modest house, drawing curious stares from her neighbors. She was nervous. What had she gotten herself into? Had she made the worst decision of her life? As the car door opened, Helena took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. Inside the car, a driver waited silently. He merely nodded and opened the back door for her. The ride to the Mitchell estate was a mix of anxiety and fascination. The narrow, modest streets of Maplewood gave way to broad, tree-lined avenues and the tall gates of the local elite's grand estates. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. When the car finally stopped in front of the Mitchell mansion, Helena felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The grand facade, with its marble columns and towering windows, made her feel small. She took another deep breath, reminding herself of her mother and the promise she had made to herself. This was temporary, just a month. A month of lies in exchange for a better life. Lucas was waiting at the main entrance, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. As she stepped out of the car, he gave her a slight smile. There was something in his eyes that acknowledged how intimidating this must be for her. "Are you all right?" he asked, with what seemed like genuine concern. Helena nodded, though her voice wavered slightly before she answered. "I'm fine. Just a little nervous." "That's normal, but you'll do great." He looked her up and down, noticing the simple but appropriate dress she had chosen, modest compared to the surrounding luxury. "We can arrange something more suitable for tomorrow's dinner. Today is just a meeting with the family, no pressure." She knew that no pressure was a lie. The entire situation was one enormous pressure, but Helena had no choice but to keep her composure. As they walked through the mansion's grand entrance, Lucas quickly briefed her on what to expect. "Today, you'll meet my father and my sister, Erin. My father is straightforward, but watch every word he says. He's always looking for weaknesses. Erin, she's another story. She can be skeptical, but don't let her intimidate you." Helena tried to take in his instructions as they crossed the wide corridors of the mansion. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the marble floors, and every detail of the house screamed opulence. Paintings by renowned artists adorned the walls, and the sunlight streaming through the tall windows made everything gleam as if from a distant dream. When they reached the living room, the tension in the air grew palpable. Samuel Mitchell sat in a leather armchair, the day's newspaper folded in his hands. He glanced up as Lucas entered, and his sharp eyes quickly shifted to Helena. There was no attempt to soften his rigid expression. Samuel was a man who carried the weight of power in every gesture. "So, this is your fiancée?" His voice was laced with a challenge, thinly disguised as curiosity. "Yes, Dad, this is Helena," Lucas replied without hesitation. "She comes from a humble background, but she's a strong, hard-working woman. I'm sure you'll come to admire her. Helena forced a smile and approached, extending her hand to greet Samuel. His handshake was firm, almost harsh, as though testing her resilience. His gaze scanned her as if searching for any flaw. Interesting, Samuel said dryly, releasing her hand. Lucas speaks very highly of you. I hope you live up to his words. Helena felt the air grow heavier. There was something in Samuel's tone that did not go unnoticed. Every word felt like a veiled accusation, a reminder that she was stepping into hostile territory. But she kept her head high. She had been through worse in life, and this moment, although difficult, was just another hurdle. Before she could respond, another figure appeared at the entrance to the room. Erin Mitchell, Lucas's sister, was the epitome of elegance. Tall, with dark hair pulled into a flawless bun and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She walked into the room with confident steps, her gaze immediately landing on Helena. So you're the surprise fiancé my brother has been hiding? Erin's voice carried a blend of suspicion and a hint of disdain. How interesting. Lucas has never been one to get seriously involved with anyone. You must be different. There was clear hostility in the way Erin spoke. Helena, however, was used to being underestimated and judged based on her appearance and humble origins. She knew she couldn't give Erin the satisfaction of showing weakness. Different? Yes, Helena responded calmly. Maybe that's exactly what Lucas was looking for. Erin raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by the confident reply, but her smile didn't fade. I hope you know what you're getting into. Our family isn't easy to deal with. She shot a sharp glance at Lucas, who remained silent, watching the exchange unfold. I imagine it's not, Helena replied, her gaze steady. But I'm willing to face whatever comes. Samuel, who had been observing quietly until now, let out a faint, sarcastic chuckle. Well, she certainly doesn't lack courage. The tension continued to rise in the room, but Lucas, sensing that things could escalate, intervened. Helena and I still have a few things to discuss about tomorrow's dinner. Excuse us, Dad, Erin. He took Helena's hand and led her out of the room, leaving Samuel and Erin exchanging glances. Helena could feel the heat rising in her face as they walked through the mansion's corridors towards the garden. Erin's sharp words still echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them shake her. You handled that well, Lucas said once they stopped beneath the shade of a tree in the garden. My father and sister are tough, but you stood your ground. I'm impressed. They don't trust me, Helena said, feeling the weight of her new reality. And they have every reason not to. I'm a stranger here. That's part of the plan, Lucas replied calmly. Don't worry, we'll make this work. Helena studied him in silence. He spoke with such certainty, but she knew the next few weeks would be an emotional roller coaster. This was only the beginning. The big day had arrived. The dinner that would seal the business alliance between the Mitchell family's corporation and its partners was set for that evening. The Mitchell mansion was buzzing with activity. Everything, from the fine linen tablecloths to the polished silverware, was impeccable. It was an event anticipated not only by the Mitchells, but by the business elite and investors from across the country. Helena, however, was a storm of emotions. Although Lucas had assured her many times that everything would go smoothly, she knew that this dinner was more than just a business gathering. It was the final test of the charade they were enacting. Samuel Mitchell, Erin, the company's board members, and perhaps other interested parties were ready to pick apart any cracks in the facade. And no matter how much she prepared, the pressure weighed heavily on her. How are you feeling? Lucas asked, watching her adjust the elegant gown he had arranged for her. Helena turned to face the mirror and studied her reflection. The dark blue dress she wore was stunning, tailored to highlight her natural grace without seeming forced. Her hair was styled in a classic updo, her makeup flawless. She looked like a completely different woman from the one who had crossed paths with Lucas at the cafe just days ago. But inside, she was still the same Helena, a humble woman trying to hold it together in a world where she clearly didn't belong. Nervous, she admitted, her eyes not leaving the mirror, and afraid I'll make a mistake. Lucas stepped closer, standing behind her. Their eyes met in the reflection. You won't make a mistake, just be yourself. That's what's impressed everyone so far. Helena tried to smile, but her anxiety didn't subside. It wasn't just the environment or the people that made her nervous. It was the weight of the lie that, with each passing day, seemed to become more real. She was getting emotionally involved in ways she hadn't anticipated. And Lucas, he was starting to look different in her eyes. No longer just the cold and distant man. There were moments when he showed vulnerability that caught her off guard. "Remember, this dinner is crucial for me, but also for you," Lucas said, interrupting her thoughts. "If we fool everyone, your part will be done. You'll walk away with the money you need." His words, though true, stung. Walk away. She should have felt relieved knowing that the end was near, but for some reason the thought of leaving Lucas now bothered her. She was growing attached to him, even though she knew that was dangerous. Lucas offered his arm, and with a gentle gesture he placed his hand on her shoulder. "Shall we?" he asked. Helena took a deep breath and nodded. It was time. The dining room of the Mitchell mansion gleamed with grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the long table where some of the most powerful figures in the business world were gathered. When Helena and Lucas entered arm in arm, all heads turned toward them. She could feel the evaluative gazes, the hushed conversations, and the subtle expressions of surprise at seeing her by Lucas's side. They took their seats, and the dinner began. Helena followed Lucas's lead carefully. Small smiles, a confident posture, and as few words as possible. The atmosphere was thick with formality, but the conversation flowed around business, investments, and the impending merger. Samuel Mitchell, seated at the head of the table, observed everything intently, while Erin remained quiet, occasionally casting sharp glances at Helena. Then one of the guests, a senior advisor to Mitchell Industries, decided to break the delicate balance with a direct question. "So, Helena, you seem to be a private person. Why don't you tell us more about yourself? How did you meet Lucas?" Helena's heart raced. The question was casual, but she knew it was a test. All eyes, including Samuel's and Erin's, were now on her. It was as if the entire evening had been leading up to this moment. She took a breath, feeling the weight of the silence in the room. Lucas had warned her that this might happen, that someone would press for details. They had rehearsed a story, a believable lie that was meant to sell their fabricated romance. But now that she was faced with telling it, something inside her resisted. She thought about her real life, her mother's illness, the hardships she had endured, and the daily fight to survive. Those experiences were her truth, and they were nothing to be ashamed of. "I met Lucas by chance," she began, her voice calm but steady. "And I know we seem like an unlikely couple. I come from a humble background, right here in Maplewood, but from a very different part of town. I work as a waitress and a seamstress. I'm not part of this world." She paused, glancing around the room. Everyone was listening intently, waiting. "But what I've learned is that sometimes fate surprises us. Lucas showed me that it doesn't matter where we come from. What matters is what we can build together." There was a murmur of approval from the guests. Helena had spoken the truth, but in a way that was genuine and won their sympathy. She could see from the looks on their faces that she had passed the test. Even Lucas appeared surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to handle the situation so gracefully. Samuel, who had been quiet throughout most of the dinner, finally spoke. "Well said, Helena. It seems Lucas chose someone with a clear understanding of life." There was a hint of respect in his voice that hadn't been there before. Erin, however, didn't seem convinced. She narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms, visibly unhappy with how smoothly things had gone. The rest of the dinner continued with a lighter atmosphere. Helena could finally breathe a little easier, feeling that the hardest part was over. But she knew the act wasn't complete yet. She was still playing a role, and every moment was a reminder of the lie they were living. After the guests began to leave, Lucas took Helena out to the mansion's garden, away from the curious eyes. He seemed emotional, in a way she hadn't seen before. "You were incredible," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "I don't know how you did it, but you impressed everyone." Helena looked at him in silence for a moment before replying, "I just told the truth, at least part of it." Lucas nodded, his gaze softer than usual. There was something different between them now, something more intimate. and for a brief second, Helena almost forgot that all of this was a lie. The morning after the dinner, Helena woke up with a sense of relief. She had overcome what seemed like the hardest test of her life. Samuel's words of approval still echoed in her mind, and Lucas's expression of admiration had left her feeling more confident than ever. But a shadow of uncertainty lingered, as if something was about to happen, and she knew she couldn't allow herself to fully relax yet. Just after dawn, her phone rang, breaking the comfortable silence of the morning. The screen flashed Lucas's name. "Good morning." His voice was deeper than usual, almost serious. "I need to talk to you. Erin wants to see you. Now." Helena's stomach tightened. She had sensed Erin's dislike from the beginning, and after the success of the dinner, she was sure Erin would try to expose her. Even with Lucas on her side, the threat Erin posed was undeniable. "Did she say why?" Helena asked, trying to sound calm. "No, but I know my sister. She's been suspicious of you from the start, and she won't rest until she finds something. Just be careful." Lucas's concern was clear in his voice. "All right, I'll meet with her," Helena replied, trying to project strength even though her fear pulsed inside her. A few hours later, Helena found herself once again in the Mitchell mansion, this time in Erin's private office. The room was sleek and minimalist, reflecting Erin's cold and calculated personality. Erin sat behind an enormous mahogany desk, her eyes fixed on Helena as she entered. "Sit down," Erin said, her tone emotionless, pointing to a chair across from her. Helena complied, sitting up straight, her face neutral. She knew any sign of weakness would be used against her. "Let's get to the point. I don't trust you," Erin started, blunt and direct. "You showed up in my brother's life out of nowhere with this Cinderella story. I'm not naive, Helena. And I'm going to find out what you're hiding." Helena had expected this. Erin was relentless. But rather than being intimidated, Helena held her ground. She had been through too much to back down now. "I'm not hiding anything, Erin. Everything you've seen is the truth," Helena said firmly. Erin leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in suspicion and challenge. "Do you really think you can fool me with that humble girl act?" Erin scoffed. "Lucas might be blinded by your sob story, but I'm not. I've had you investigated, Helena. I know where you live, where you work, and all about your sick mother. Of course you'd agree to my brother's ridiculous proposal. But here's my question. What are you really after? A cushy life, maybe?" Her words stung, but Helena refused to break. Erin didn't know the whole story and probably never would. This wasn't about luxury or status for Helena. It was about her mother's life. But explaining that to Erin was pointless. She had already made up her mind. "The only thing I'm doing here is fulfilling an agreement with Lucas," Helena said calmly but firmly. "I'm not after your fortune, Erin. I agreed because I need the money for my mother. There's nothing more to it." Erin let out a bitter laugh, as if Helena's response had been all too predictable. "Everyone says that, but let me give you a warning. Helena, if you hurt my brother or tarnish this family's name, I will make sure you never lift your head again." Her voice was sharp, full of veiled threats. Helena didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. And still, she couldn't back out now. Not after everything. She took a deep breath, keeping her composure under Erin's cutting gaze. "I understand your point, Erin, but I can assure you, all I want is to leave this situation the same way I came in, alone and with nothing that isn't mine." Erin's eyes narrowed further, as if she were trying to decipher whether Helena was being honest. Silence hung between them, until finally, Erin stood from her desk. "Very well, we'll see," she said coldly, signaling the end of their conversation. Helena stood and left the office, her heart racing but feeling that she had held her dignity intact. Erin might be a fierce opponent, but for now, Helena had held her own. As she stepped into the hallway, Lucas was there, waiting for her. Relief washed over his face when he saw her. "What did she say?" he asked, genuine concern in his tone. "What do you think?" Helena smiled weakly. "She said she doesn't trust me and that if I do anything to hurt you or the family, she'll destroy me." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I knew this would happen. She was never going to trust you." He looked at her with a mixture of worry and admiration. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this. I knew it wasn't going to be easy when I agreed, and I'll handle it," Helena replied, her usual strength returning. Lucas looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I didn't expect you'd be this strong through all of this. At the dinner, with my father, now with Erin. You're a lot tougher than I thought." Helena felt her heart tighten. What was Lucas trying to say? There was something in his eyes that made her think he too was beginning to feel the weight of their lie. But before she could ask, he looked away. "Let's get out of here," he said abruptly, changing the subject. "We both need a break from all this." Helena nodded, following him out of the mansion. The dynamic between them was changing. The lie was becoming more complicated, dangerously entangled with feelings neither of them had been prepared to admit. As they walked together away from the mansion, Helena knew that sooner or later she would have to face the truth. She wasn't pretending anymore, at least not to herself. The days following the dinner were a whirlwind of emotions. Helena and Lucas spent more time together, both in and outside the Mitchell mansion, sparking rumors among the staff and even among the board members of Mitchell Industries. What had started as a simple arrangement was now turning into something much more complicated. Lucas was changing. Their conversations were no longer purely functional. He began to open up about his life, about his childhood, shaped by the absence of his mother and the immense pressure from his father. Lucas, the perfect heir in his father's eyes, had always been the boy who was never allowed to fail. But now, with Helena, he seemed to show cracks in his armor. On the other hand, Helena found herself navigating a flood of emotions. The closeness with Lucas affected her in ways she hadn't anticipated. From the start, she had known that this was all a lie, but what she hadn't expected was how deeply her heart would get involved. She was falling for Lucas, a man who, despite his kindness, had initially hired her to live a lie. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden together, Helena finally found the courage to address the growing tension between them. "Lucas, and we need to talk," she said, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. Lucas turned to her, instantly recognizing the seriousness in her voice. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. All of this." Helena gestured toward the mansion, toward the life she was temporarily living. "This lie. We can't keep doing this. We're getting involved in ways neither of us expected, and I can't—" She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I can't keep pretending." Lucas looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He remained silent for a moment, as if processing what Helena was saying. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke. "I know. I feel it too." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "In the beginning, this was just a plan, something I needed to secure the company's future, to appease my father. But now—" He shook his head, clearly battling his own emotions. "Now, I don't know where the lie ends and the truth begins." Helena's heart ached. Lucas was admitting what she had long feared but hadn't wanted to confront. The lie had turned into something real, something neither of them had expected. "Lucas, Helena began, but she was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Erin striding quickly toward them. "So, this is it," Erin said triumphantly, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "I knew something was off from the start." She looked directly at Helena, her voice dripping with disdain. "I found out the truth. You're nothing but a fraud." Lucas stood up, his expression darkening as Erin approached, her accusations hanging in the air. "Erin, this has gone far enough," he said, his voice sharp with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" But Erin wasn't intimidated. She shot her brother a look of pure defiance before tossing a folder of documents onto the garden table between them. "I hired a private investigator, and guess what?" she said, her voice smug. "There's no record of a relationship between you two, no evidence that you've known each other for more than a month. It's all a sham." Helena felt the ground disappear beneath her. There it was, the truth, laid bare. The carefully constructed lie they had built was about to crumble. She had known that Erin would eventually uncover the truth, but she hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, and so brutally. Lucas glanced at the papers for a brief moment, then turned to Helena. She couldn't read his expression. What was he thinking? What would he do now? "It's true, Lucas." Helena finally broke the silence, her voice heavy with sorrow. "It was all a lie. From the start." "But—" She paused, feeling the sting of tears welling up in her eyes. "But what I feel now is real. I never wanted to hurt you, but I knew this would all end like this." Lucas stood there, his face tense, and then he took a step back, as if he needed space to process everything. Erin, meanwhile, looked triumphant. "I warned you she was a gold digger, Lucas. You were blinded by her sob story, and now look where we are." She crossed her arms, waiting for Lucas to confirm her suspicions and take action. But then, something unexpected happened. "Erin, stop," Lucas said, his voice calm, but with an authority that surprised both Helena and Erin. "Yes, it started as a lie. Yes, I did this because of the pressure from Dad, because of the company. But what happened between Helena and me is more than what I planned. And now none of that matters." Erin looked bewildered. "What do you mean, it doesn't matter? She deceived you." Erin's voice was rising, filled with frustration. Lucas turned to Helena, his eyes softer now but resolute. "What matters is that, despite how this all began, I know what I want now." He took a step forward and took Helena's hand in his. "And what I want is you, Helena. Not as a lie, but as the incredible woman you are." Helena's heart pounded. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of relief. Lucas was choosing her, even after everything. "Lucas, she began, but the words escaped her. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I know this is crazy, but I'm willing to face whatever comes. We don't have to pretend anymore." Erin stood in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. The garden was quiet, the only sound being the soft rustling of the wind in the trees. And in that moment, Helena realized that the lie had transformed into something much bigger, something real, something worth fighting for. "So this is real?" Helena asked, finally finding the strength to speak. "We're not pretending anymore," Lucas smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "No, we're not pretending anymore." And so, under Erin's incredulous gaze and in the luxurious setting that had once seemed so unattainable, Helena and Lucas found each other for real. No more lies, just two people, ready to face the world together. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button. Until next time.